Snow pressed against the alley's brick walls as the investigators lifted the rusted lid of the forgotten storage trunk, their flashlights catching on a single silver locket resting atop sealed evidence bags, its hinge fractured, its inscription worn by time, hinting at a truth buried beneath decades of December silence. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. Philadelphia in 1982 carried an unsteady quiet in December, the kind that settled into the iron bridges and coal-dark rooftops before dawn. Christmas lights blinked along row homes on Passyunk Avenue, muted beneath sleet and the dull ache of winter mornings. The city's newspapers, thick with holiday ads and end-of-year reflection columns, buried a small missing notice on page 17. A 22-year-old university student named Emily Carver, last seen leaving a campus study hall just 3 days before Christmas Eve. She was described as bright, responsible, and careful with her routines, a detail that sharpened the alarm felt by her parents and the tight academic circles she moved through. The timing, so close to holiday travel and crowded streets, complicated early ground searches. Police volunteers waded through snow-packed sidewalks and shuttered storefronts, while the Delaware River's shoreline froze into hard, impenetrable banks, further limiting options. Though the holidays played on, the case remained in the background hum, felt but not openly acknowledged by a city preoccupied with seasonal cheer. The initial days of inquiry lacked urgency, not from negligence but from statistical expectation. Adults often disappeared briefly around Christmas, traveling, avoiding relatives, or shifting plans without formal notice. Yet Emily's absence held an unusual stillness. Her dorm room remained orderly, her bags unpacked, her return ticket to Illinois untouched. Phone records, limited by the era's analog systems, offered no trail. No late-night calls, no cab receipts, no campus security logs matching her departure. Investigators moved between her apartment building and the University of Pennsylvania library, speaking to clerks and winter break staffers, who recalled her focus on exams and her visible fatigue under academic pressure. The weather worsened, bringing freezing rain and halting search teams. Dog units struggled on iced sidewalks. Patrol cars navigated with chains. Each hour pushed the case deeper into holiday anonymity, overshadowed by Christmas broadcasts, New Year forecasts, and travel advisories issued along I-95. Though the city continued its festive momentum, the Carver family held private vigils in a rented room near City Hall, facing the cold marble of the courthouse while detectives reviewed expanding files. Emily's final week produced no known conflicts, no secret relationships, no financial concerns. Her professors spoke of her ambition and quiet reserve. Classmates described her as diligent, more inclined to libraries than nightlife. A single note emerged from the registrar's office. On December 20th, she had requested access to an archival collection at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, a detail that puzzled detectives. The file she sought held colonial letters, not material tied to her academic major, yet the sign-in log confirmed her visit. That research detour became the first thread in an otherwise unyielding pattern of absence. The archive staff recalled the day clearly. Holiday hours had shortened access windows, and heating issues forced several reading rooms to close temporarily. Emily remained in a corner desk, copying passages until late afternoon. From that academic note to the evening she vanished, the record went blank. Security footage was sparse, relying on magnetic tape that cycled and rewound over itself by week's end. The footage from the south entrance loading bay, potentially capturing her exit, had already been overwritten by December 26th. That loss later fueled procedural revision in the department, but in 1982 it became simply an accepted limitation of technology. What remained were handwritten logs, street patrol recollections, and seasonal taxi traffic tallies. Emily's name appeared nowhere after the archive sign-in. Holiday office closures slowed momentum. As New Year's Eve approached, detectives circulated flyers along South Street markets, commuter rail platforms, and coffee counters near Rittenhouse Square. The city, draped in winter garlands, responded with polite concern but little concrete memory of her movements. By January 2nd, the case qualified as cold under statistical criteria, though emotionally it remained burning in the circles closest to her. Time passed, not with resolution but with accumulation. New semesters replaced old, weather cycles shifted, and the city's infrastructure grew around the empty datum of Emily's disappearance. Evidence boxes migrated into basement storage beneath the Municipal Records building, where humidity warped labels and winter salt corroded metal shelving. Decades later, in 2019, modernization grants led to digital conversion of cold case files. Analysts recovered microfiche documents once presumed damaged. Among them, a small envelope marked simply with a case number contained the broken silver locket photographed at intake, but never cross-referenced with personal items in Emily's dorm inventory. The hinge had fractured, making its interior photo plate unreadable until high-resolution scanning restored the image. It revealed a younger Emily beside a childhood friend named Claire Donnelly, who, by subsequent database search, had lived only a block from the storage facility where the trunk of archived evidence was found. That rediscovery triggered a reassessment of timelines. Claire had moved from Philadelphia in 1983, married, and changed surnames. She never appeared in local follow-up interviews because her family relocated just after New Year. Detectives reopened contact, this time through genealogical research units that had evolved since the original investigation. Claire responded willingly, offering records from shared summers, noting that Emily had worn the locket daily throughout college. She explained that during their last semester phone call, Emily sounded distracted but hopeful, referencing an internship application with a local historical foundation affiliated with a private donor. That donor, as records now indicated, once maintained storage space near the same alley where the trunk sat untouched for decades. The link was subtle, but enough to warrant further site excavation. Winter returned, mirroring 1982, as forensic teams re-entered the freezing corridor and recovered the trunk holding the original evidence. The renewed investigation unfolded not with televised fanfare but with procedural persistence. The trunk contents, once mislabeled under property seizure rather than missing person evidence, contained carbon copies of internship papers and a holiday schedule indicating Emily had been invited to a donor reception on December 21st, the night she vanished. The host, deceased since 1999, had been known for expansive personal archives stored across multiple rented units in the city. Interviews with surviving staff depicted a busy evening of historical benefactors, holiday music, and academic presentations. Sign-in books, faded but intact, listed Emily's name. She had attended, contradicting early assumptions. Weather logs confirmed ice advisories that night, reducing pedestrian traffic and increasing shuttle reliance. A driver's manifest, also recovered, confirmed Emily had boarded a private shuttle arranged by the donor for student guests. The shuttle never returned her to campus. Maintenance logs showed a mechanical failure near the industrial district. Mechanical failure alone did not explain the disappearance, but it anchored the route and timeframe conclusively. City tow records confirmed the shuttle had been retrieved at 2:10 a.m. on December 22nd. The driver reported leaving passengers in an office to await alternative transportation. Most students were paired and documented. Emily, according to the ledger, signed out separately, intending to walk the last few blocks back to her dorm despite freezing rain. Construction in the district had rerouted sidewalks, leaving only alley passages open. The same alley where, decades later, the trunk would be found. Forensic mapping reconstructed her known path, showing plausible disorientation under sleet conditions, aggravated by street lighting and holiday closures. With this spatial reconstruction, investigators could finally align 1982's fragmented logs with modern geographic data. It became apparent that Emily's route intersected with an unregistered storage unit later, connected to the donor's assistant, a man who had never been interviewed. The assistant, identified through payroll ledgers and faded event rosters, was Thomas Leary, then 34, a logistical coordinator responsible for shuttle routes, storage access, and archival transfer scheduling during the holiday period when many administrative workers were on leave. His name never entered the core investigation because his role fell under seasonal hire classification, and the donor's foundation provided limited personnel lists at the time due to ongoing endowment audits. In the renewed examination, digital tax records and union archives confirmed his continued employment in peripheral roles through the early 1990s, after which he retired quietly to a rural township outside Allentown. This identification did not immediately implicate him, nor did it suggest wrongdoing, but it placed him in proximity to Emily's final verified location and the unregistered storage space unearthed in 2019. Cold case analysts, trained in chronological reconstruction, used the new evidence to rebuild transit patterns and staffing rosters around December 21, 1982, including shuttle delays, inventory transfers, and after-hours access logs for storage facilities scattered along the industrial corridor. The Locket became the central anchor in this reevaluation. Photographic spectroscopy clarified its interior etching, a winter date and a childhood promise between Emily and Claire, inscribed long before college. It held no inherent legal weight but served as definitive confirmation that the object belonged exclusively to her. That the locket was discovered atop official intake envelopes inside a trunk, not formally entered into police chain of custody, raised questions regarding procedural misfiling. The trunk itself bore coding typical of private archive shipments rather than law enforcement cataloging. This discrepancy pointed back to Thomas Leary's administrative duties and the overlapping storage accounts held by the donor. Investigators traced payment receipts for leased units along the alley, demonstrating that Leary maintained authorization to open and seal crates throughout the winter of 1982. While the donor hosted end-of-year receptions for scholars and patrons, his assistant managed the physical movement of exhibits, boxes, and personal effects, often without secondary oversight. By February 2020, aging infrastructure at the municipal records basement made continued storage untenable, prompting full relocation and digital conversion. This transition accelerated examination of minor evidence fragments once dismissed or misallocated. Among those rediscovered items was a maintenance clipboard documenting door repairs at the same alley facility only 4 days after Emily's disappearance. The contractor noted a broken latch and frost damage, indicating forced or abrupt closure under freezing conditions. The clipboard contained Leary's signature, circled by a date stamp matching the period of unaccounted hours following the shuttle's breakdown. The conjunction of time, access, and object location tied the assistant indirectly, but consistently to the last known window in which Emily moved through the darkened industrial blocks. The renewed inquiry avoided speculation. Modern investigators proceeded with quiet adherence to procedure, ordering a structured interview with Leary, who, now in his 70s, maintained an unassuming residence surrounded by retired neighbors and dormant fields. He consented to speak, describing the late 1982 season as busier than usual due to construction-related relocations. He acknowledged handling storage crates but claimed no memory of any missing student. Age and time rendered his recollections indistinct, yet not resistant. Digital mapping tools, unavailable in earlier decades, cross-referenced transit logs with foundation schedules to produce a narrow corridor of likelihood during the night Emily vanished. This spatial narrowing transformed the case from broad winter disappearance into a precise logistical lapse inside a controlled environment. Weather archives became another critical element. The sleet storm of December 21st had generated multiple safety warnings, closures, and traffic diversions. Historical meteorological summaries showed that frozen precipitation intensified between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., matching the shuttle's mechanical failure window. Visibility dropped below 1 mile, and wind gusts forced plow operators to suspend operations temporarily. In this context, Emily's departure from the shuttle site on foot became more perilous than originally documented. Investigators reconstructed her path using street lamp outage logs and salt truck routes, revealing that the alley lighting systems failed intermittently that winter due to shorted wiring. Employees of neighboring warehouses reported hearing ice slew from roof lines and steel roll-up doors buckling in sub-zero shifts. Such conditions could have created both sensory disorientation and environmental obstacles along her chosen route. Parallel to physical reconstruction, analysts reviewed insurance correspondences from the donor foundation. An internal memo dated January 3, 1983 referenced damaged property at the alley unit and reimbursement filings for water intrusion in one of the sealed trunks. This memo, previously overlooked due to misclassification under financial documentation, was now reinterpreted as a potential marker of Emily's final proximity. The trunk in question matched the description of the one found decades later containing her locket and evidence envelopes. Though no explicit mention of a missing individual appeared in the memo, the timing aligned precisely with initial police alerts and emerging public concern. The donor foundation, at that time, focused on artifact preservation rather than incident reporting, and thus logistical repairs overshadowed any latent connection to a disappearance. Media coverage from 1982 remained sparse but informative. An editorial in a local weekly paper documented increasing unease among university communities over winter safety, shuttle reliability, and industrial zoning near academic districts. Though Emily's name was not cited directly, the article illustrated a broader awareness of vulnerabilities faced by young adults traveling through underlit corridors during holiday recess. The city's public mood, captured in these quieter pieces, contrasted sharply with the commercial brightness of Christmas displays. This dichotomy underscored the silent urgency of Emily's case, which through no intentional concealment, dissolved into the seasonal churn of year-end distractions. Modern lab analysis provided the definitive shift. Trace fiber collection from the interior of the trunk, preserved remarkably despite humidity and time, yielded a consistent match to Emily's winter coat, described by her parents during early inquiries. The coat itself had never been entered as evidence because it was assumed she wore it upon departure, and thus remained with her when she vanished. That fibers rested inside the trunk indicated a momentary contact or transfer. Stability of the fiber dye composition allowed conclusive identification through comparative spectroscopy. This confirmation elevated the trunk from misfiled storage to critical evidence container. The presence of intake envelopes beneath the locket suggested official handling, though incomplete, and a breakdown in archival chain of custody rather than malicious concealment. Investigators assembled the final causal sequence. Emily exited the shuttle in icy conditions, attempted an abbreviated route through the alley using her familiarity with campus shortcut maps, encountered an unsecured storage unit recently accessed by Leary due to artifact transfers and weatherproofing tasks, and succumbed to environmental exposure before any foul play could be established. The temperature that night dipped to life-threatening lows, with wind chill advisories equivalent to sub-zero locales. Hypothermia onset, under such conditions, could occur rapidly, especially if clothing became saturated by freezing rain. Her collapse likely occurred within feet of the storage entrance. In an era before standardized emergency response integration between private facilities and city departments, her presence may have gone unnoticed until morning. Subsequent handling of the trunk, locket, and envelopes reflected bureaucratic misalignment rather than intentional erasure. The legal conclusion reached by the district attorney in 2021 classified the death as accidental, stemming from exposure exacerbated by infrastructure failures and weather conditions. No criminal charges were filed against Leary or any Foundation personnel, though procedural reforms were instituted regarding archival record requisition, private-public facility access, and emergency reporting protocols near academic zones. Emily's family received official notification accompanied by a detailed forensic breakdown, acknowledging the decades of uncertainty inflicted by incomplete systems rather than malicious acts. In the quiet winter following the case closure, new plaques appeared in campus corridors reminding students of historical routes, closed alleys, and winter travel advisories. The city's holiday lights, once indifferent to the unspoken absence of a young scholar, now flickered in a landscape that understood, belatedly, the cost of lost details and uncorrected files, each bulb reflecting a corridor of memory thawed only by time. The announcement of closure did not arrive with press conferences or bold front-page placements, but with a measured, written briefing circulated through Philadelphia's legal and archival networks. In the months following the official ruling, the city quietly undertook the slow task of reconciliation with its own institutional gaps. Winter returned, as it always did, with garlands looped along the Schuylkill River bridges and ice dulling the pavement beneath layered holiday advertisements. The Carver family traveled to Philadelphia for the first December since the ruling, stepping into a city that had aged, expanded, and restructured around them in ways that made the absence of their daughter feel simultaneously immediate and profoundly historical. Downtown storefronts, now modernized, bore little resemblance to the era of Emily's last known steps. Yet the low winter sun, the way it struck the courthouse facade at dusk near Christmas Eve, mirrored the same pale gold tone described in the earliest case notes from 1982. That quiet repetition of light, rather than any official record, offered the truest sense of continuity from past to present. City officials arranged a private meeting in a second-floor archive conference room whose windows overlooked Independence Mall. The Carvers sat across from cold case supervisors, forensic archivists, and the district attorney. No language of closure was used, only a description of what the evidence could support and what no system, no personnel, and no decade of investigation could alter. Exposure, hypothermia, and misdirected custody chains had converged in an era unprepared for comprehensive surveillance and rapid response coordination. The family listened, absorbing each technical report and procedural timeline with the same restraint they had maintained throughout the search. Their daughter's final December, defined not by malice but by conditions, logistics, and timing, stood before them as resolved fact. When the meeting ended, they departed without ceremony, walking along brick pathways dusted by early snowfall, past tourists wrapped in bright scarves who were unaware of the decades-long story that had converged only yards away. Media follow-up trickled through local broadcasts in polite, measured increments. Brief news segments acknowledged a solved cold case without attributing blame, presenting it as a winter tragedy shaped by urban configuration and seasonal risk. Former investigators who had worked the case early in their careers expressed subdued relief, noting that unanswered disappearances cast long administrative shadows. Archival professionals from the Historical Society spoke of the transformation in storage protocols, climate control, and digital indexing that now prevented the kind of mislabeling that delayed critical evidence review for nearly 4 decades. The broken locket, its hinge stabilized and its interior photo digitally preserved, was transferred to Emily's family. They accepted it privately and declined public display requests. In their possession, it no longer functioned as evidence, but as a marker of childhood ties, university aspirations, and the brief corridor of adulthood she had navigated before winter's intervention. Urban planners took note of the case as well. Committees reviewing pedestrian access near industrial districts updated winter routing clarity, ensuring that alleys no longer functioned as default passageways when main sidewalks closed during construction or weather advisories. Reflective signage, heated transit waiting zones, and cross-institution reporting agreements between private archival facilities and municipal emergency lines became long-term infrastructure revisions rather than temporary policy adjustments. Safety improvements extended beyond campus limits, reaching freight-adjacent neighborhoods and warehouse perimeters that once lay outside late-night public travel considerations. Philadelphia's winter grid, once fragmented by unlit corridors and extended construction detours, gradually shaped itself into a more cohesive network. None of these measures rewrote December 1982, but they recognized its implications. In the academic world that had framed Emily's ambitions, memorial gestures remained subtle. Her former department created a research bursary in her name, awarded each winter to a student pursuing archival studies with particular focus on urban preservation. The intention, stated quietly in internal correspondence and winter bulletins, was to honor her final documented academic inquiry at the Historical Society. The faculty who remained from that period, now approaching retirement themselves, recalled her meticulous notes and understated concentration. Their recollections, while sparse in public circulation, found form in the bursary's mission statement. The decision to anchor her memory in academic continuity rather than commemorative plaques reflected an understanding that her life, not her disappearance, best represented her purpose. Meanwhile, the Cold Case Division continued its systematic modernization. The Carver file, once a thick, uneven bundle of photocopies and handwritten sign-in sheets, became a streamlined digital record available for internal review. Training modules incorporated her case as demonstration of environmental risk, incomplete chain of custody systems, and the long arc of personnel oversight reform. No sensational elements accompanied this educational framing. Instead, Emily's timeline functioned as a sober illustration of how infrastructure, weather, and administrative transitions can combine to obscure straightforward conclusions. Her story moved from unresolved narrative to procedural reference point, not as caution against individuals, but against fragmented systems. The man once central to logistical proximity, Thomas Leary, remained in his rural residence. No civil suits were filed against him, and no further interviews were requested after the final report. He continued to receive winter maintenance assistance from local community services and attended routine medical appointments. His involvement, defined by circumstance rather than deliberate action, receded from public relevance. In the official text closing his part in the record, investigators noted that he had followed the protocols available to him at the time. Absence of comprehensive oversight in 1982, not neglect, led to the property transfer process that ultimately obscured Emily's final geography. When winter settled over his township, no reporters arrived, no vigil formed, and no retrospective articles emerged. His life, like the case he intersected with, continued without spectator framing. The storage corridor where the trunk was found underwent redevelopment. The alley, once functional yet overlooked, was incorporated into an expanded pedestrian arts walkway connecting renovated galleries and seasonal markets. The brickwork was repointed, lighting fixtures upgraded, and access points opened to public view. Visitors, unaware of its historical entanglement, photographed the seasonal displays and winter craft booths that now occupied the space. During December evenings, soft instrumental carols echoed between storefronts, and vendors handed out spiced cider beneath strings of warm bulbs. The transformation did not erase its past. It simply shifted its utility from unmonitored passage to curated winter thoroughfare. During the first Christmas season after closure, Emily's family returned to Illinois and observed the holiday without commentary. They placed the restored locket among evergreen boughs on a mantle, not as symbol of loss but as evidence of recovered certainty. Their private grief, once suspended in ambiguity, settled into quiet finality. The decades between disappearance and conclusion carried weight, but the resolution allowed the weight to rest. They wrote a brief note to cold case supervisors thanking them for persistence rather than justice, a word that never fit the specifics of this winter narrative. By the second winter after the ruling, Philadelphia's December rhythm resumed its familiar cadence. Commuters crossed bridges glazed with ice, tourists photographed historic facades beneath garlands, and students hurried along polished sidewalks illuminated with LED wreaths. The cold case division continued its work, attending to decades-old files with updated forensic rigor. The Carver case, no longer open, no longer central, remained a marker of what had once been unknown but no longer remained incomprehensible. The city did not commemorate her publicly, yet its infrastructure, policies, and academic frameworks now bore the imprint of her final journey. In this way, the case found its conclusion not in dramatic revelation or courtroom spectacle, but in the steady, methodical acceptance of environmental fact, archival correction, and passage of time. The broken locket, once suspended in procedural limbo, returned to its original purpose, a quiet token of connection, no longer required to testify. The city, reshaped by winter after winter, stood intact. Snow fell, lights blinked, and the season moved forward, carrying with it the enduring, unembellished truth of a cold December in 1982, finally understood and finally at rest. Winter in Philadelphia has a way of settling into the stonework, the iron bridges, and the muted corners of neighborhoods that do not receive the brightness of Center City holiday decorations. The final accounting of Emily Carver's disappearance, its cause, its setting, and the institutional errors that prolonged understanding, did not attempt to rewrite this landscape. It simply acknowledged the unbroken continuity of a city that moved steadily through more than 3 decades of winters, while one timeline remained unanswered. In the year after the Carver ruling, archivists conducted their final audit of storage redundancies, sealing the municipal basement where climate fluctuations had warped labels and obscured case histories. Steel shelving was dismantled, and the last of the outdated boxes were transferred to controlled environments, each tagged with barcodes replacing handwritten dates. In that new order, Emily's file occupied no special shelf, no marked corner, but joined the rest of the catalog under the universal logic of resolved classification. By the second Christmas season following closure, the city's calendar of winter events unfolded with reliable structure. Market stalls lined Dilworth Plaza, orchestras performed annual carol programs, and the predictable surge of travel intensified along Amtrak corridors and airport terminals. For most residents, the Carver case existed only as a brief mention recalled by older neighbors, a line in a winter editorial, or a reference in professional archival circles. For investigators who had contributed to its reopening, however, the resolution remained present not as memory but as procedural standard. The shift from analog to digital, from compartmentalized storage to unified access, defined not merely a technological upgrade but an epistemic one. Lost objects, misfiled evidence, and overwritten footage were no longer inevitable consequences of seasonal understaffing or infrastructure endurance. They became preventable, measurable, and correctable. In the neighborhoods bordering the old industrial corridor, winter signage improved incrementally. Salt routes were posted in advance rather than reactive measures, alley closures announced through automated alerts, and shuttle schedules maintained redundancy to eliminate solitary disembarkations during severe weather. These modifications appeared unremarkable to passers-by. A new reflective marker here, a reinforced pedestrian light there. Yet each detail bore correlation to that December in 1982, when a young student took an alternate route under heavy sleet and never returned. The transformation of the alley into a curated walkway continued, its seasonal displays expanding each year. The historical tie to the cold case remained absent from public brochures, not out of avoidance, but because the case's truth required no ongoing narrative framing. The city had already absorbed it. The Carver family did not return to Philadelphia after their second visit. Their final communication with the district attorney's office requested that no anniversaries be recognized, no scholarship ceremonies televised, and no symbolic dedications undertaken in Emily's name beyond the academic bursary already established. They expressed a wish for her life to remain anchored in personal recollection rather than public reconstruction. Their decision aligned with the forensic clarity of the case, an accident articulated not in mythic terms but in meteorological data, shuttle repair logs, fiber analysis, access rosters, and environmental collapse. With the return of the Locket, they no longer needed the city to hold explanation on their behalf. The timeline had reached its endpoint. In the forensic division, new analysts and interns trained on digitized modules that cited Emily's case as inflection rather than catastrophe. They learned to identify procedural absence, to trace the sequencing of misplaced containers, to consult whether archives not as supplemental material but as primary determinant in winter disappearances. Autopsy interpretations in exposure deaths were refined through her file, clarifying onset windows under freezing rain saturation and wind chill variables. Traffic Division partnered with academic transit authorities to ensure nocturnal transportation never defaulted to unsupervised pedestrian travel during extreme conditions. This consolidation of agencies was perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Carver ruling, not memorial, not retrospective honor, but neutral, ongoing improvement. Leary, whose proximity to the case rested solely in logistics and calendar coincidence, passed away quietly in his sleep during a late autumn week 3 years after the ruling. His obituary in the local township paper referenced years of museum service, transport coordination, and retirement spent in horticultural clubs. No mention was made of the cold case, and none was needed. His record, clarified by investigators, remained defined by procedural compliance. The era in which he operated, fractured by construction detours, limited communication networks, and unintegrated reporting structures, held contextual weight without implying fault. His winter passed without inquiry or retrospective scrutiny. For the Historical Society, the improvements instated after the cold case resolution became embedded practice. Student researchers accessing archival rooms during December rotations now received mandatory orientation on after-dark travel corridors, weather alert monitoring, and shuttle rerouting protocols. Internship agreements incorporated emergency clauses for severe conditions that once existed only as informal caution. In internal memos, administrators occasionally referenced the winter of 1982 as a chronological marker for reform. But publicly, the institution presented the changes as modern standard rather than historical response. Its grand reading halls retained their polished wood, and its vaults remained at controlled temperatures, sheltering manuscripts and relics beneath the same winter atmosphere that had shaped Emily's final academic pursuit. As Philadelphia settled into each subsequent December, the criminal justice sector moved steadily through remaining unsolved cold cases, applying the procedural lessons of the Carver file without invoking her narrative directly. The absence of dramatization defined the true closure, a solved case that did not become folklore. Streets that once bore underlit stretches and intermittent power failures now reflected LED safety grids. Patrol coverage extended predictably across commercial and industrial borders. Student winter advisories no longer vanished into unnoticed bulletin boards, but arrived through unified communication lines that tracked shuttle capacity and travel delays in real time. The city, unaltered in its winter harshness yet improved in its winter management, embodied the resolution's final expression. It did not mark the anniversary of Emily's disappearance. It simply ensured no student would find themselves navigating an isolated industrial corridor during freezing rain without immediate contingency support. Lights remained steady, plows coordinated schedules without interruption, and shuttle dispatching implemented parallel routing even on low-demand nights near Christmas and New Year's. In this manner, the case's conclusion persisted not as story but as structure. Snow continued to fall over Independence Mall, Rittenhouse Square, South Street markets, and the redeveloped alley where the trunk had rested for decades. Holiday wreaths returned each season, attached to lampposts unchanged by memory or investigation. The city's skyline, sharpened by winter air, reflected no trace of the uncertainty that once displaced a single student from its streets. In the stillness of late December nights, when traffic quieted and church bells counted down hours to a new year, Philadelphia held the unembellished truth of Emily Carver's final winter. A moment of exposure, a chain of administrative missteps, and a resolution realized only by persistent archival correction. No dramatic epilogue followed. No broadcast series revived the narrative. The case remained closed in the plainest interpretation of legal and municipal terminology. A young woman vanished in a winter that overwhelmed infrastructure. Decades later, archived evidence aligned and the city adjusted. That was the sum, precise, factual, complete. And as each December arrived thereafter, with its lights, its sleet, its quiet bridges, and its layered sidewalks, Philadelphia continued forward, carrying within its ordered systems the silent knowledge of a cold case finally, irrevocably resolved.